Well, first of all, thank you for the wonderful talks that we just had. That was very interesting. And also thank you very much for this opportunity. It's an honor to speak a little bit about one of my greatest passions, which is engaging the public with science. I want to talk a little bit about how I do that, but also focus a little bit on why I think it's important. I am a Dutch ecologist and herpetologist, 27 years old. I'm currently a PhD student at the Wageningen University, and I study the ecological trap hypothesis. But I also have my own education business, which is called Sterrin's Wild World. And the aim of that business is really to educate people of all ages and all different kinds of backgrounds on science and reptiles specifically, because I think that's very important for the advancement of science and conservation. So these are the tools that I currently use. I've written a couple of books. I have a TV show, a theater show. I'm an ambassador for several brands. I also co-founded the Conservation Front, which is a nonprofit organization that makes documentaries about human-wildlife conflicts. And I also use a lot of social media. But before I get into those tools, I want to get into why I think it's crucial to have engagement in the first place. Well, it's important to realize that there is a bias in science as well as society. And that is problematic because herpetofauna is suffering worldwide. And if we all agree that we want to conserve species, whether that be for their intrinsic value or for biodiversity reasons, well, for that you need science. And science is greatly impacted by the public opinion. You can easily see this everywhere around you. It's much easier to get funding for studying charismatic species and not so easy to get funding for studying species that are not loved by the public. And therefore, I think engagement and education is very important to really try to change that public opinion, to get more funding and also more people into studying reptiles or other animals that are not well loved. If you have a young child that's interested in biology or ecology, how great would it be if that person chose to study reptiles instead of birds or mammals, which are already studied quite well? So about this bias in science, it really happens to the best of us. There is was a very famous scientist who said some pretty nasty things about the marine iguana, that it's hideous looking and dirty black color, sluggish in its movements. Not nice things to say about an animal. And really, he didn't only say not such very nice things. He also literally harassed the animals. Like he grabbed them and he threw them in the sea. And he did that multiple times, like pretty weird behavior if you ask me, but he really dislikes reptiles. And yeah, it's this animal. This is the marine iguana. I personally think it looks very cute and beautiful, but that's just me. And the scientist who did that was Charles Darwin, whom we all hopefully love and appreciate, but he did have a very strong bias against reptiles. He did have something good to say, and that is that they do taste delicious. So that's just Charles, but there have been studies done about the facts surrounding taxonomic chauvinism. And that shows that despite reptiles being more diverse, they are less studied. Birds and mammals are highly, highly overrepresented in several fields of science. There is this one study by Bonnet, Shine, and Lourdes that looked at over 1,000 studies focusing on cognition and behavior. And it showed that 44% was on birds, even though birds only make up 20% of the species, and 27% was on mammals, even though they only make up 9% of the species. Why is this? Well, one big reason that really comes to us is anthropomorphism. Even Charles Darwin recognized this himself when he, for instance, was talking about a pit viper. Pit vipers and also many other reptiles have protruding brow bones. That's just their morphology, brow scales. And that can make them look angry, because when we humans are angry, we frown our brows. And yeah, that's related to anger, but obviously this is not the same for reptiles at all. And another reason that has nothing to do with us really is crypsis. So as you can see this image on the right side, there is a snake in there. Maybe you can find it. I think it's a copperhead. You can see that, many reptiles are incredibly well camouflaged. As an ecologist, I try to do some, population assessments, and it's not easy because of this camouflage, and also because many species are nocturnal, or for instance, because they are fossorial, so they're living underground. So in a sense, it's harder to study these animals compared to many mammals and birds. So we know that there is a bias in science, and this is even more pronounced in society. I often use this example, but there's many, many other examples available. Maybe we all remember Cecil the lion was killed by a trophy hunter, and this caused worldwide outrage, worldwide media coverage. It sparked debates about lion conservation. Everybody was standing up for lions in general, and also for justice for Cecil, which I think is great. However, when you look at an incident in Indonesia where a villager was attacked by a crocodile, and the villagers proceeded, in a revenge spree, killing 300 crocodiles, it did get into some news articles, but it didn't get nearly as much media coverage, didn't cause nearly as much outrage as the killing of one lion. And maybe this wouldn't be such a big problem if everything was fine and dandy with reptiles and herpetofauna in general, but that's not the case. We see a worldwide decline in reptiles. In 2004, it's an old study, but the numbers are a little bit better, but still there is problems with this. Only 6% of reptile species were even assessed. 20% of reptiles and 40% of amphibians are threatened. And we all know, like, the major problems, it's very similar to what other animals are facing. Of course, habitat loss, fragmentation, degradation. We have the illegal trade that's very harmful to some species, bycatch, invasive species, pollution, and disease. So reptiles and amphibians are suffering worldwide. And if we agree that, maintaining biodiversity is very important, then we need conservation. But how can we properly conserve species if basic knowledge is lacking? And that is the case for many of these species. So that's why I focus so much on engagement, not only because I love it, because I also love just doing scientific research and getting caught up in that, but because I truly believe that engagement and education is necessary for the advancement of science and therefore also of conservation. So I have written 2 children books. They are currently only available in Dutch. The first one is called The Big Reptile Book, and it's basically a book with all the information that I wanted to have when I was little, but it wasn't available. So it's about the evolution of reptiles, about locomotion, reproduction, diversity, venom, about the species that can be found in my country. And it's doing amazing. And the second book is called Sterrin's Reptile Journey, and it's a trip around the world. So I basically visit each continent, highlight some very nice species, but also put some focus on cultural aspects, current events like pollution and deforestation, for instance. And per continent, I interview a scientist that studies reptiles, but in many different ways, because I'm an ecologist, but there's also people studying venoms or DNA or evolution. And I want to show different options to children, because not everybody needs to become an ecologist. You can, though. It's really nice. I'm also finishing my first book for grown-ups. It's called The Fascinating Life of Reptiles. And there I focus really on the social behavior of reptiles, which is not really many people know about the social life of reptiles. And I focus on the role of these animals in ecosystems, as well as what we can maybe learn from reptiles as humans. So this is, for instance, a page out of my first book. I really like to use short paragraphs. Not every child can read super well. You also have dyslexic people. Short paragraphs, short little facts, lots of illustrations, lots of photos. And for me, engagement is all about interaction and creating a conversation. And the way you can do that in written text, for instance, is by providing puzzles and quizzes. So in my book, there is this huge quiz, so you can test your knowledge. Did you learn from the book? What chapters do you maybe need to read again? And that works really well. And I always provide a way to get back to me. If children read the book and they still have questions, they can ask me, they can email me, and they do that quite a lot. It's really cool. In my TV show, it's called Crazy About Reptiles. I compare 5 Dutch reptiles with 5 Spanish reptiles. So there's lots of cool facts about convergent evolution. But also one of the reasons to do that was to show the children in the Netherlands and in Belgium that, hey, we see all these TV shows in Africa and Asia with all this amazing wildlife, Australia as well. But Europe is amazing too. We have lots of cool animals. And how cool is it that when you go to Spain, to the Costa del Sol, that you don't stick to your swimming pool, but you actually go out and, you know, find these reptiles in the wild. And also in this show, I take children through like an interactive quiz, but the children at home watching the show can also participate in. So it's all about interaction again. So I also have a theater show based on my book with a trip around the world. And the environment and the atmosphere I want to create, you can see it in the bottom right picture. My theater show, I don't really talk that much. I really like to keep it short and simple. And I really encourage an environment where children ask questions and where there is interaction and where we have a conversation and where it's okay to pitch in. Sometimes I ask a question like, do you know what the advantage of scales would be? And a person raises their hand and says, I have a bearded dragon named Timmy. Oh, that's great. I love it when there is an environment where, you know, conversation is possible. And an important point when you're talking as an educator to children, but also as a scientist to laymen, is to really not belittle. You know, if there is a good environment where people can ask questions, then it's okay actually to use difficult words because they feel free to ask what it means. I'm also the ambassador for National Geographic Junior, the Dutch department of the children's part of National Geographic. I do campaigns, I write the foreword for the magazine, and I make vlogs about science and about reptiles and showing children what it's like to be a scientist or to go on rescue missions, rescuing animals. And it's a great way to connect with children as well. For grown-ups, there is our documentary that I made with the Conservation Front is online on YouTube. It's called Saving the King Cobra. It's only 30 minutes. So if you're interested in that, please go check it out. It really shows also how the local people there in Indonesia try to fight the problem of the human-wildlife conflict between humans and king cobras. I also use a lot of social media. So I provide information about specific species, about scientific concepts, and I take people with me on my rescue missions. As I said, I study the ecological trap hypothesis, and I focus on artificial structures where animals, you can see it here in the video, where animals can get trapped and they die, and it's usually sad, but I also give people tips on what they can do themselves if they encounter such an artificial structure, how they can rescue the animal, how they can mitigate the negative impact of that. So social media for me, it's crucial for my mission. And one last point I want to make, if you do your job well as an educator or an engager, people will be inspired. And there's nothing worse than being inspired by a talk and then be like, oh, but how am I a part of this mission then? Only that person is doing a cool job, but I'm not a part of that. So by adding a call to action to whatever it is that you're talking about, people can actually feel like they are, you know, part of the mission and helping. And that can be like as simple as creating a hashtag. I put some examples here on the screen, but there's many that you can think of. And I think that's a great way of really getting people involved. Thank you so much for your attention.